Welcome back to another episode of Just
Yes.
a Squirrel
Squirrel.
Looking
Looking
for a nut,
For a
nut.
nut.
trying
Trying
to
To
get out
get
of
get
out
out of this rut.
this
right.
rut.
Not bad for a trio.
Yeah, it could have been better if we actually did this in person.
Hey, well, someday we're going to do this as a barbershop quartet. We'll really have something to talk about. Now, today's topic is about whether you're scared when you meet someone new. I want to just talk a little bit about Ares, the Greek god of war. He was handsome. He was tall. He wore armor all the time. Everyone hated him. And he had little friends that followed him wherever he went. Two of them were Phobos and Deimos. Phobos was the spirit of fear. Deimos was a spirit of dread. And when you meet new people, sometimes there is a real sense that perhaps Phobos and Deimos are lurking right around the corner from where you might be standing. Chris or Oleg, are you familiar with Phobos or Deimos when you meet someone new? Talk to me.
I'm not.
This is my first time hearing about it.
Yes, me too.
Well, they like to keep their identities low key, especially when they're trying to compose.
So I'll share something that it's probably completely unrelated to anything that you just said, Scott. but
My
this is
feelings are.
this is the only way I can relate to the story that you just
Now I'm the
described.
god of war. That's right.
So, how long has it been? 9-10 months ago, when I first started to travel, one of the things that I wanted to do before I left was actually go to New York City. Well, let me explain the full reason behind it, right? First is to be able to see you for the first time, Scott, and the second is the flights were significantly cheaper flying out of JFK compared to Detroit. So it was a win-win scenario when it came to those two things. But I'll tell you this. In meeting you for the first time in person after having known each other for I think it was a year and a half,
At least.
maybe going on to 2 years virtually. And then another friend of mine, Thomas, who lives in Norway, once again, never met him before this past Christmas, where I actually spent time with him and his family. It's an interesting feeling on many different levels. First is that I do believe that there was this underlying fear, and it wasn't great, but it was still there enough to a point where I recognized it, that what is that person going to think, and am I going to like and respect and see the person the same exact way that I was able to see through the virtual screen? Because
In other
there are
words,
things
was familiarity going to breed contempt?
Exactly, because I'm sure there are things that you do in person that you may not do on a Zoom call, you may not do on here, or a variety of other sessions that you and I were a part of. So that was one thought. But I will say that in meeting someone like you, meeting Thomas and a handful of other people, it shattered all those beliefs and it actually made it better. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I actively chose to reframe my own expectation of what is it going to be, and does it have to be this way, and if it's not, then what else could it be? So I kind of just went into with an open mind, but I'll also say that to a degree there was an element of fear of whether or not we'll be able to connect, relate the same exact way that we've been able to through this. For me also, like, I was able to live at your place for the 3 days. So that's also a different experience. Because usually you meet the person and you kind of see them during the coffee hour, right? Now you get to see them at night. You get to see them, as they're going to the bathroom or what. Not, you know what I mean? Not to that degree, but like
I don't go to the bathroom.
you see
Not
them
me.
you see them in a variety of forms, and so that was another thing. I remember actually vividly having these thoughts as I was staying at your place. I'm like, okay, this next phase where we eat dinner, how's that going to work? Because here we could do this through Zoom, but when you do it in person, it's just a completely different experience.
What if you had come and stayed with me and you realized that I stank really bad? Or what if, like, you realized, oh my God, I hate him? Or if you opened the refrigerator and there were like worms crawling around underneath the salad and you saw that there, what would you have done?
Well, I think there is a reason why certain situations are called one and done deals, right? And so I think, I think, I mean, I don't think, I think it definitely would have created a different image of how I pictured it before. So that I think that's just a full transparency there. Now, would I have gone as far as befriending you or some of the other things? Probably not. Like I still would have remained contact. Uh, Now, it would have given me more information that I'm sure would have impacted the friendship in some way. So I think all these opportunities, at least for me, and I don't know if Chris can relate to this, they're all like pieces of information I gather. I open the fridge, and just based on that image, it's new information. So you could assume certain things. Uh, where do you put me to sleep on the times that I'm staying? I could begin to build out my own stories, right? Where you live, how you live, all those things are just all like glimpses into your life, which help me form my own perspective about your own life.
I think a lot of this stuff comes down to expectation.
Mm-hmm.
On both sides. One, is the person going to like me? Am I going to like the person? The second thing, especially like if you're meeting someone in person for the first time, whether it's via Zoom or either like dealing with them via virtually, and maybe the person, like when you go out to lunch, you realize that the person is like extremely rude to the
Yeah.
waiting staff, and it's like, whoa, like he or she was, or they are very nice to me when it comes to interacting on a podcast or whatever the case may be. But then when we go out and have lunch, this person is extremely rude. I want to be around that. So I think the nervousness comes from, or the angst comes from, I don't know what I'm getting into on
Mm-hmm.
both sides, right? And then it's a relief when the person is exactly the way you thought them to be when you met them via virtually. Now, also to the relationship dynamic. Like for example, if you're going on a date with someone, like I met my wife and we were friends in 2007, and then we started dating in 2013. And that first date, I was extremely nervous, right? Like I've known her and we've interacted via social media, and but when it comes to like, okay, we're going to pursue the relationship, this is the dynamic switched because of what we're about to try to embark on, which is a relationship, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that has to do with it. And I think that's what I think is natural angst, because, and also too, if you don't have any expectation, or you think the person is one way and you have no nervousness at all, sometimes the angst or the anxiety comes from when it's the total shock of what you expect too,
Yeah.
right? Like I expect Oleg and Scott to be fantastic people because I've interacted with them over a year and a half, like you said, Oleg, how you met Scott. But then in person, it's like he's the total opposite person. Like you may
Yeah.
have never been not been nervous going into it. Then you're like, whoa, he is totally different than what I thought he was. And then now that's awkward because now you traveled to meet the person and you have to figure out how to get back to where you were. So it's
Yeah.
a lot of dynamic and nuance in that.
The other thing that it makes me think of, Chris, as you were sharing this, like the whole concept of meeting someone for the first time. I mean, that happens on a daily basis. Like, yeah,
For
we
sure.
have some level of familiarity, even if it's the same person based on previous experiences. But still, every single day, we do meet a slightly different version of that individual that we met the day before. And the only reason why it made me think of it is because I remember one time I was going to lunch with a mentor of mine, someone who was a mentor when I was in high school, I think. And I came back to Ann Arbor and I was wanting to reconnect with people like him who made a big difference in my life. We went to lunch, we walk into this restaurant, and he did the same exact thing that you just described. Rude to the waiter. He ordered one thing and I guess he ended up getting a slightly different thing. And so, like, the whole restaurant was bound to hear about it. And I remember vividly sitting there because I've never been in a situation like that with him where we were able to share a meal. My context with him prior was working in the backyard, carrying rocks, planting, stuff like this. never in a public setting in a restaurant with other people who then get a chance to create their own perceptions of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, I realized that, yes, he was the one that was creating the situation, but I was also a part of it. Because now people were not only perceiving him, but they were also perceiving me. As a way, I was kind of like a partner in crime, so to speak, right? Like,
Yeah.
things were going on around him, but then I'm assuming that people were also associating myself with him because I was sitting at the same exact table directly across, and in that was a case that it just made me realize that, okay, here's a person that I met however many years ago, and I remember him as drastically different, and then we went into a restaurant and it's a completely different person.
Wow, that is very scary to me, actually. I wanted to say hello to Patrick. How are you? Thank you for reaching out to us from Hawaii. It's always good to see you here. Oh my God.
Patrick said he was afraid. He stayed at your place? Did he stay at your place?
When
Because he never stayed at mine.
I think that he's probably talking about Patrick. If you could just maybe explain that a little bit, but I think it's probably the first time he came, and I think it probably was the first time he met me. The first time Patrick met me was at a hotel. He may have come and stayed at my place, or did we come and visit him at his place? I don't remember who visited who. I am kidding. He stayed at my place. Okay, well then, I know I'm not delusional. I'm actually curious though. The first time I met Patrick was he had known my husband for many years, and then he came to Las Vegas where my husband and I were on vacation, and he was going to meet this new person that his friend David had been with for a long time. I know I was nervous meeting Patrick. I remember very vividly walking down the hallway of the hotel and wondering what I was going to see when I turned the corner into the swimming pool and met this friend that David had been raving about for years. Would his friend like me? If his friend, exactly what you're talking about, if his friend didn't like me, I'm sure Patrick would have pulled David over and been like, yo, David, look, there's a problem here. And so, yes, you were in the same room with your wife, Rita. I remember that as well. So, I think that sort of goes as to some of the real reasons why someone might be afraid. I wanted to preserve my relationship with David.
Yeah.
I, didn't want to make a bad impression on his friend. But it is interesting. One thing that I wonder if your story is illuminating is to what extent we realize when we're making a bad impression on someone else when we are meeting them for the first time. B, to what extent you care. Like, to me personally, if I figured out that you were telling a story about me abusing wait staff in a restaurant, that would cause serious self-reflection on my end. I would be horrified with my behavior, deeply embarrassed. Maybe the person wouldn't care. Before we get into any response to that or any additional thoughts, I do want to greet Jessica and say hello. It is good to see you and welcome back to the show.
You know what, Scott, before we move on to the next question, this question's got me thinking because Oleg had teased it a bit, and I'm thinking about people and how nuanced they are. What I mean by that is when you say, are you afraid of meeting somebody for the first time, right? And Oleg mentioned that one person can be different people as well. So, for example, you're one way when you're tired. What if you're in a relationship, whether it's a friend or a romantic relationship, and you haven't experienced that person when they're dead tired, or now you have to experience that person when they're angry. You have to experience that person when they're happy. You have to experience that person when they're let down. You have to experience that person when they go through grief. It's a lot of different things that you like. What if you're with somebody for a very long time, but you never experienced them dealing with like a loss of somebody dear to them? And then that whole dynamic shifts, right? And then now you have to get to learn that person, right? Because of what they're dealing with, or they're extremely happy, or they've been fired and they're angry, right? You have to learn how to deal with that. So I was just thinking about that, like how you can become anxious or afraid depending on the person that you're with, if they're in different emotional states.
And I think it also goes to the capacity. I mean, what you just mentioned, Chris, it's like the capacity to be able to handle each individual or the relationships. Like with what you just said, it kind of makes me realize there is a reason why some or all of us or whatever the number is can only handle so many different relationships. And I think it's because of that. Like there's so many different versions of a person that you meet, and sometimes I might meet Scott, and I don't know, on the sad day or whatever the day is, and it's like then it becomes that I kind of have to reevaluate. Okay, do I have the capacity in my life to be in his life based on how I know him today? Now things might change moving forward, so I don't know if that somehow translates to that as well. Like why it seems that most of us kind of towards later stages of life only do have 5 to 10 to 20 close relationships.
Well, wait a minute.
Considering that we've met like thousands of people.
I want to go into something here, though. That's a
Mm-hmm.
good question at the end, but how many versions of us really are there? And how much variance is there within our personality? Like, really?
Hundreds.
I don't know that I agree with that. Is that always true? Or is it all just different shades of the same person? Like, if I'm crying or mad, am I totally different than I am right now? Or is it just a more extreme version in one way or the other?
I think it depends on how you react to people, because this question is the interaction of people. Like you're afraid of me, like if you're afraid of meeting someone else for the first time. Like I may know you, Scott, when you're always happy and you're joyous, right? And then I'm meeting you, like I said, like if you're crying, if I'm meeting you while you're crying, that's a different version of Scott. I've never met this Scott before. And then like, what if I say, "Oh, Scott, are you around?" You lash out at me because you're angry, right? Yes, you're the same person technically, but you're a different person at that time because of what emotional state you're in.
Yeah,
At least that's how I look at it, at least.
And not every emotional state's the same. I mean, according to Casey and many others, like at the end of the day, there is fear and love, but at the same time, there's also all these things in between. Like fear and love look drastically different based on a situation. Meeting someone for the first time versus, I don't know, burning your hand and then having to pick up the phone and talk to your friend, right? Probably going to evoke two completely different reactions. So I think, in my opinion, just based on my experience, there are as many as there are emotions, there are probably those types of personalities. And then there's probably a combination of each one as well.
Well, Casey Berman does say, as you pointed out, all is love and fear. Have any of you all ever met someone for the first time and become afraid?
Of
Besides
them? Of like the person?
time I met you, no. I'm kidding.
Afraid of a person. If I met them for
I'll tell you a wacky story. I know a woman once
so.
who met someone and was instinctively afraid of him, and it turned out he was a serial killer.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And she actually went and reported the conversation that she had, because she was so wigged out with the police, and they told her, they thanked her, because to their knowledge, due to some things that happened during this conversation, they said that she's the only person they know of that had an encounter with the serial killer and survived.
I don't know if I've ever met somebody and then afterwards I was afraid of them.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, I think for me, I've met people that I felt like I aligned with before, but then meeting them in person, I realized that the synergy was not what I expected it to be, based on the phone calls or Zoom calls or whatever the conversation was. So I do think that, at least for me, I think the in-person carries a different kind of frequency, different vibe completely than meeting someone like this. Now, also, I think depending on what you do with that person, that could also create opportunities where I may or may not like to spend with them.
What about dating?
That's probably a better question for all the exes. So let me just invite them all real quickly.
But I mean, Chris, you touched on this earlier, and nowadays people meet people mostly through phone apps,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They might
Sure.
meet
For
each other
sure.
through mutual friends or whatever, but a lot of dating occurs that way. And I was hanging out with someone I've been friends with for a long time, a female, by the way. Thinking about this, it would have been interesting to have a female on the show tonight. I have to be honest about that. Who was showing me the photos of the men that were approaching her on the dating app that she was on. First of all, people, take pictures of yourself that makes you look sane. Please. Don't think you're going to get a date if you're looking like you're completely bonkers. But be that as it may, hey, maybe that sort of honesty gives her a chance to steer clear of weirdness in her life. So maybe that's bad advice. But I've got to say, like, I have to wonder if you see someone and you meet them online, do you, especially in a dating context, are you afraid? Are you afraid that they won't look like what they say they will? That happened to me when I was still dating. I'd meet people through some very, very early versions of the internet, and they look nothing like, you look like John F. Kennedy on your in your photo, and then I'd come and see you and you're 65 years old.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there was that, and then there was also the vibe. They might have been perfectly nice, but the vibe that they were sort of like what you were just talking about, like it wasn't what I was expecting. Like maybe in the profile there's a lot of exclamation points and fun and smiley faces and all that, and then when I meet them they were vaguely funereal.
I think from that standpoint, I think that's where the fear of rejection comes up more than anything. And like, because if for example, if I see, someone that's, let's just say she's extremely attractive, my fear of is two things may come across your mind. Two things, like the first one may be, gosh, she may be out of my league based on her physical appearance alone. Or you're afraid that if you walk up to her, she may not, feel you may think that she's beautiful, but she may look at you and like, oh, I don't want to talk to, and then now you're embarrassed and your self-esteem goes down because of the reaction she gets, as opposed to say, no, thank you, I'm okay. The reaction she may give you may crush your self-esteem from a physical appearance standpoint. So that could stop the fear of rejection from a dating standpoint, probably stops most people in terms of pursuing. But then also too, let's just say like you said, Scott, you approached it. You said you find the courage to overcome your fear, talk to the person, and that initial reaction, they agree to a date. And then you go out on that date, and like you said, it's like, oh, because everybody you're attracted to, you're not compatible with. Yeah, so you may be sitting down and and have in a nice conversation, and then next thing you know, they open their mouth and you're like, oh my God, this person is it just turns you off because, it turns you off because of how they think or what they expect to happen, and then they may move too fast in terms of telling you what they want, and that is like, wait a minute, I'm just trying to get to know you currently. I'm not thinking about marriage or kids right now. Let's just talk about us, or let's talk about you, so I can see if this is going to work. So it's a lot of things that can happen within that context for sure.
How do either of you know when you know someone, like when you really know someone?
I think, I'm sorry, Scott, if you want to go.
No, please.
In my personal opinion, I think that when you know someone, I think that comes with being battle tested. I'm strictly talking about from a relationship standpoint. It's very easy to be in a relationship, whether it's friendship, whether it's a romantic relationship. It's easy to be with someone when it's nothing but clear skies, rainbows, clouds, and sunshine. That's that's easy to deal with, right?
Yeah.
But what happens when some rain comes, right? And your relationship has to go through a turbulent time. And that, I think you get to know somebody through different situations with adversity, success, stagnation, all of that. And then you get to see how they react within those things, because it's very easy to be with someone or be a friend with someone. Like if me and Scott never argue, or me and Oleg never argue, we can have a real conversation. I think that you actually determine that from a friendship standpoint. If I consider you, Oleg, a great friend, but I'm afraid to
Do you
like if
consider
you
me a
ask.
great friend?
I do
Okay, good.
based off. But if I'm afraid to be honest with you, like or
Yeah, true.
I don't want to
Mhm,
bring up certain
mhm.
topics because I don't know. Oleg may take offense to that if I tell him that
Yeah.
I don't like his shirt, right? Or is like I think that's how you can gauge where you are on a friendship gauge if you feel like you can be truly open with someone too.
Mhm. Well, the comment about the shirt is we have to like the shirt because the shirt relates to the show. Like that would be poor publicity for us and the sponsor. But I'm also curious, as you're sharing this, Chris, and once again, question for you or Patrick or Jessica or anyone else. When it comes to being battle tested, do you ever create the battlefield yourself? So what I mean by that is, do you ever push the buttons of the other person
Mm-mm.
just to see what they react or how they're going to respond to adversity and things like that? Or do you just let natural events kind of create the circumstances?
I
Natural
would,
events.
yeah, I will never do that to another human being. I think that is manipulative. It's
Mm-hmm.
deceitful. It's disingenuous. That is not how I operate in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
if I ever figure out someone is doing that with me, that actually will call my relationship with them into serious question. Now, there was someone that I knew for a long time actually who asked me a seemingly innocuous question. And when I talked to you about how innocuous, it was really what was my favorite producer? Well, who was my favorite EDM producer? What did I think of producer XYZ? And I said, I liked this producer's material. And he was like, that he told me that was a test. You failed. And it was like, well, I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And he said, well, this producer believes things that I think are wrong. And the fact is that you're willing to still be a fan of his, even though he has XYZ beliefs, says to me, you're a nice person, but I could never be friends with you. And you failed that test. So it's like, okay, goodbye, good riddance. That was a manipulation. He didn't give a damn what I thought about this producer, which is a shallow topic anyway. But he did it all to really to set me up for something that I didn't even know I was entering into. It was taking an element of consent out of my engagement in the relationship and bringing deceptiveness into it. Now, for me, we've talked about this before on this show and elsewhere. Every now and then, a little lie I'm okay with, right? Like if you aren't really sick, but you just don't want to go into work that day because you hate your boss and you call in sick. Am I going to think you're an unethical person fundamentally because of that? No. If you don't tell me that it is my surprise birthday party because you want it to be a surprise, so you lie and say, I'm just going to have a meeting with you, I'm cool with that. All of these things exist in shades of gray, and if there is a legitimate ulterior motive for it or the degree of the untruth, I might not like it, but I can understand it and I can live with it. But setting the relationship on the line or testing someone, saying that or if I were to do that to someone, I am the arbiter and me alone as to whether someone is worthy to be in the relationship with me based on criteria that I'm not going to tell them about or allow them to fully engage with complete consent. That's wrong. That says to me, if I were to do that, I would hope that my husband would pull me aside and tell me that my ethics have been compromised.
Do you prejudge the people that you meet? So I'll give you an example. And once again, I don't know, this might be a judgment or just an observation. There have been recently, like time to time, I would come across like certain posts, and some posts would say, okay, I have X number of friends on XYZ platform. Anyone who responds will get to stay my friend. So like, I don't need, it's true. Like I'm sure the two of you have seen posts like that. If not, I'll send them your way. But like for me, it's just like I realize that okay, I look at this post and I form an immediate judgment in my head. I'm like, okay, there's no value for me here besides the fact that if I'm going to comment, then this person's going to keep me in their network. I don't know them. So I'm finding that is in those situations with certain um, circumstances like that, that I try not to as much anymore, but I'll prejudge the person prior to meeting them for the first time. So like if everything that I see about them is through that lens, then it kind of like paves the relationship before the relationship even takes place.
I think people like that have low self-esteem anyway. Right. If you post something like that, like if you respond and you get to remain my friend, that
I'm
I'm like,
surprised. Have you seen this?
I've never seen it before, but
Dude, I've seen this like 10 times already.
I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, like, I
Yeah.
don't like if I will probably unfollow just seeing something like if I was following somebody, I'm like, I don't even want to deal with anything about like that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Scott, do you ever see this?
I've seen it a lot on Facebook.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
It's
But
a
see,
real
because me, that person just trying to get fake validation. Like that's a self-esteem thing. Like, right. So it's
Yeah.
like if you respond, that creates this false sense of love and community, and you get to stay my friend. Like it's a privilege or something like that. Like I look at stuff like that. That's crazy to me.
All right, so one other thing, and then we can proceed with the 20 questions here. But the other thing that I've been really curious about, and this is, I think, somewhat related, is do you ever find yourself writing out a response to, let's say, a post like that, and then halfway through you just think to yourself, "Why am I doing this?"
Mm-mm.
Just erase it and move on to the next thing.
Mm-mm.
Or like a topic that you can express an opposing view, like money can't buy happiness, or money can't buy that. Like I'll give you an example, a concrete example. I came across a post recently, and it said something along the lines of, money can't buy X, Y, and Z, and part of X, Y, and Z, one of those things was time, quality of time. So I
Mhm.
started to, write a memoir form saying like it could create money, could buy experiences, or allow you to go to experiences that can create quality time, therefore quality memories. And as I was explaining this full blown narrative, I literally just halfway through, I'm like, all right, on to the next. I just erased the whole thing and just moved on.
Money can buy time, but that's another topic.
Yeah.
It sure can.
Money can buy time for sure, without question.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I know, because like if I see stuff like that, I think to answer your initial question, I do just chalk it up in my head of what type of person this is. Because
Mm,
I used to be I didn't used to be empathetic at all, and then until I started going to therapy, and it kind of like I have like a broader sense now. Like I don't
mm,
take things at face value as much. So as opposed to me would see this person and like who is this? Who is this person that say like if you respond now, then you get to stay on my number? Like who are you? Like as opposed to look at it like that, I will more so. That's why I said the first thing I said. Well, that's a self-esteem issue. So that person had something has happened, whether it's their experience that causes a person to want to feel validation by posting something like that. That's a deeper thing with that person. That
yeah.
person may not realize that, but that's how I look at it when I see you. Well, you can stay my friend if you show me some likes or whatever, because you're trying
Yeah.
to, trying to make yourself feel good for whatever reason.
It's
But when I was,
fascinating. Like this whole
yeah,
field of networking and meeting people, it's just like, for me, it's one of the most mind blowing experiences, because it's like every day I have an opportunity to meet someone for the first time. But once again, kind of going back to how we started, you never know that the version of that person you're going to meet that day, or what's on their mind, or how, the recent events, whether it's like the shooting we had or things like that, are going to impact them, and what are they going to choose to do with that information. What are they going to share? How are they going to share it? It's just, it's like an unsolved mystery of life.
yeah, for
Well,
sure.
now, but that being said, there
Hmm.
are situations in which I feel like the chances are better or worse. And then there are also situations in which I feel like the match was so off, it does kind of make me question the judgment of the person who did the introducing. So, for instance, at this point, I think I've got a strong enough sense about you in particular, Oleg, that I will send certain people your way and certain people not. Actually, Chris, I feel like I've got a good enough sense of you with that too, particularly like if it were to come to someone in a business context or a potential podcast guest
Mhm.
there. And if I were to get an introduction from either of you, I also feel like you all are people whose opinions and emotional intelligence I have assessed during the course of my interactions to be high enough that I would have confidence that my time were not being wasted. There are certain people who have introduced me repeatedly to people that have nothing mean, that I'm just like, why exactly did you think that we would enjoy talking? Right? Or there was someone, the one introduction that they gave to me was someone who was horrible. In my opinion, she spent the entire hour monologuing, like kind of yelling about her opinions about COVID vaccines, which is to me not personally, just Scott Mason, not a preferred topic of conversation. The first time I've met you. I don't want to talk about them at all. So I think that assessing the emotional intelligence of the intermediary is something that is, to me, relevant to this and to whether I feel fear meeting that person again. For instance, the intermediary that introduced me to this particular person, I would say, if they were to do future introductions, I might be a little afraid to meet that person. Now, one thing, though, that's interesting is once you meet that person, you may or may not have fear, but what makes you decide to take it a little bit further? And actually, I think Chris and I are an excellent example of that question being played out. Chris and I did not meet online. We met live years ago at a Chamber of Commerce meeting where there were a zillion other people that we could have met. And then for whatever reason, we talked, I remember it. And then for whatever reason, sometime afterwards, Chris randomly reached out to me. I presume it wasn't random, but he reached out to me, as most people don't in those settings. And we had coffee. I remember it really well. And we found a way to stay in touch ever since. And so that to me also is one of those things that I find curious. When you go to a setting like a live networking meeting or any sort, maybe a live party, do you feel fear when you are approaching the people that are in that sea of humanity? And also, what makes you lose that fear and decide to go another step? Maybe, Chris, I could just turn this over to you for some thoughts about that, because clearly, in that case, you were the one that took the next step. You were.
Yeah,
I'm
so
glad
I think,
you did, by the way.
Oh, for sure.
Chris and I still haven't met. Life still hasn't found a way to make that happen.
Yeah, we have to make that happen for sure.
I think we tried 3 times, maybe going on to 4.
Yeah, cause you're in because Brian's in Pennsylvania. You're in Pennsylvania too, right?
No, Ann Arbor.
Ann Arbor.
And
That's
I
right.
remember
That's right.
before
That's
we
right.
were trying, for whatever reason, it's like I couldn't do it, or it was just
Yeah, we had to figure out a way to cross paths for sure. I think in a networking event, I think everybody it's a reason why people go to surround themselves with people who they are familiar with or they know. Like when you networking by its definition is meeting people that you don't know to start the relationship, to kind of build that out, your network, right? But normally when you go to these events, what do you see sometimes? Like when you walk in, you see people clustered up with people who they already know, right? That's what you see. Now, of course, if you don't have a network and you're trying to build one, I think everybody has that gut feeling at first, because sometimes you don't know what to say or how to carry on a conversation, because sometimes the person you meet, may not want to have a conversation, and as you're trying to build the conversation, somebody they know comes and then they just go off with that person. So that's like a weird interaction. But I think you break that fear just by talking to the first person. But every time I would go to someone, I would just talk to one person, because when you talk to one person, you get especially if it goes well, your confidence is there, and then you can exchange business cards, and then you go to the next person. But I think you just have to. It's like with anything, like you have to just start it, and then once you start, you can build on that. What makes you go to the next step is the interaction. I met Scott. At the time, he was with a printing press company, and I just loved, one, his energy, 2, work ethic. I'm like, if I can have some of that rub off on me, that would be fantastic. And also, 2, not the person wasn't like we weren't trying to sell anything to each other. I think that's the one thing too, because some people you meet, you may think the interaction went well. You sit down with them, they just throw the kitchen sink at you. You're like, I don't want to, I don't want to do that. Like me and Scott just talked about networking, how to get better at that, and who to go to. And I'm like, oh, this is like I'm learning how to do it. I didn't know how to do it, and he seemed like he was a natural at it. Everybody knew Scott in there, so that's why I was like, okay, let me try to pick this person's brain. So like that's what kept me reaching out to Scott to like kind of learn more and more skill sets.
It's interesting because I thought you were a superstar immediately.
I appreciate that.
The gut feeling I had. So I wanted to get to know you better because to me, almost immediately, this is someone who's going somewhere. Okay.
I appreciate
Let me hitch my star to that wagon. Have you guys ever been, though, really wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Many times.
Yeah,
I would say
sure.
kind of going back to your first question, Scott. For me, it's an interesting question as far as what is that thing, what is that feeling that makes you want to do something with another person. So for me, it's I think it ties into legacy. I think it ties into whenever I come across someone that I genuinely connect with and we can see eye to eye, not necessarily on every single topic, but enough where we can still challenge each other, but move forward within that challenge. I want to be able to preserve that. I think for me, the reason why I want to do that is because I remember I was in 10th grade, I was in high school, and I was required to do a project for my US history class where I had to interview someone who had been part of a world changing event. And my grandpa, I chose my grandpa for that project. He was part of World War II. And so I remember sitting down with him and having a full blown conversation. In fact, I listened to it recently. And to be honest, I was terrible at interviewing, terrible at asking questions. I just wrote down a bunch of questions. I can't even tell you if I listened to what he said in the moment. But the guy was nice enough where he told me honest answers with stories and things like that. So the reason why I bring that up is because now I'm finding that whenever I come across people like you two, people like Thomas, people like Casey, people like Nicole and whoever else, I see so much impact and value that you guys have in the world that sometimes people don't even realize. And so having realized that myself, I want to be able to share that. I want to share that with other people. I want to share that with future generations because now we have at least in my opinion, we have the capacity to do things that previous generations weren't able to do. You weren't
Oh, for
able
sure.
to save these things on YouTube for however long when my grandpa was a kid. Those things didn't even exist. So imagine a number of years of just wisdom and experience. Not that it was wasted, but it just wasn't able to be preserved. It wasn't able to be recorded in a way that my grandchildren could hear it and be like, oh, this is what kind of your family tree sounded like. This is what your grandpa looked like. So I'm almost taking it as a responsibility now to do that because I find how important that is to be able to just share other people's perspectives and keep it in a format like this. I mean, if these are the things, as long as we don't remove them or they don't get removed, these are the things that are going to outlive us. It's this conversation.
For
Record
sure.
it. Like it's almost proven. As long as Google is in existence longer than we are, right? Like these are the things that are going to live for many, many generations beyond the time that we pass.
For sure.
Have you ever been friends with someone for a long time and begun to fear that the friendship wouldn't last? That they are, or begin to realize that they're not someone who you thought that they were? Chris?
I wouldn't say not the person who I thought they were, or that, or maybe I think that you outgrow people too.
How do you know when that happens?
When you're trying to progress and you kind of share that with the person of what your aspirations and dreams are, and they in a nonchalant way was like, they're like, yeah, I'm not trying to do all of that. I'm comfortable where I am. Kind of.
Mhm.
They don't say it exactly like that, but you kind of get the gist that they're not trying to progress at all. Like they're okay with where they are, and that they're not even gonna try to improve themselves, right? So, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes this person's been in your life for years, decades, even, and trusted friend, and you're like, you know what? I really want to improve my life in this way. I really want to make an impact. I want to start a media company so I can keep my digital footprint, or maybe leave like these nuggets of wisdom for somebody who, whether it's my family or somebody who I never will meet in my life, but I said something that could change their life based on either my experience, how I got through it, and all that type of stuff. And then the other person is like, yeah, I'm just working so I can get to Saturday. That's all I'm trying to do. I want to just enjoy the weekend. I do my job, blah blah blah. And that person, like I heard this saying before, like that. You can't take anybody up with you if they don't want to move,
Mhm.
right? If you're trying to go here, and that this person is not trying to go here, you can't pull them up by your ambition, or like they see the example, because they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. But the
Mhm.
reverse isn't true. That person can take you down with them, or can bring you down with them. So that's why when you recognize a person like that in your life, regardless of who it is, and it may be hard to let that person go because they're not giving you what you want or what you need, or even that support system, or even if they don't want to improve, you're like, listen, I'm cool with where I am, but I'm going to support you 100%. Anything you post, I'm going to like, and I'm going to leave a comment. I'm going to buy a shirt. Like they're helping you. They may not want to come up with you, but at least they're not trying to say, why you want to do all that, Scott?
Yeah.
Oleg, why do you want to travel the world? Like everything you need is right here. When you start hearing things like that, you can kind of tell what type of mindset this person has.
How do you say goodbye to those relationships, Chris?
I think communication slowly fades.
Mhm.
You just sort of let it wither away.
Because some people don't
intentionally let it wither away.
100%, because most people can't do cold turkey. They just can't cut the person off the very next day. They just can't do that.
And also, some people can't handle the truth.
100%. That's a fact. That's a super fact. Like
I realize this, not to interrupt the two of you, but like and that's something I'm trying to, and I don't necessarily know the right way. I don't think there is a right way. I think they're just kind of whatever way you pick, and then you got to live with the consequences of it all. But I'm realizing in some of those situations, I personally have a harder time letting the conversation fade. I would much rather put some sort of reasoning behind it, because for me, it also creates closure. It also gives me an opportunity to turn the page, to go on to the next chapter. Whenever I leave certain things like that, and I think the only reason why I feel like that is because I've been on the other side of that. I've been on the side where the person stopped communicating. And then meanwhile, I'm sitting back here and thinking, damn, what did I do? What did I say? When did it happen? Who was there with me? So I'm going through this whole, narrative, trying to figure out what actually took place. And then only to realize down the road that the friendship outgrew each other. The person had different priorities, different things that they were valuing at the time. So I think if anything, it's probably whatever the choice you make. Like, but for me,
For
I know
sure.
it, like, making that choice, it gives me closure. It gives me like, okay, whether or not you accept it, that's your journey entirely. But the fact that I chose to take ownership of it and kind of accept that as the decision I'm moving forward with, then I can flip the page. Then it doesn't feel like, okay, there's nothing that's left to be explored even more.
And sometimes honest conversation can spark something in the other person in the positive way. Like, for example, like if someone comes and say, like, why do you want to do X, Y, and Z? I'm like, listen, dude, if I'm being honest, if you're not gonna support me in whatever way, I can't have this energy around me, to be honest. I'm just being 100% honest with you. And if I see you in public, I'm going to be cordial. I'll say hello, how are you? But I'm going to keep it moving, right? I'm not going to sit there, like, it's almost like when people ask you, why do you want to do X, Y, and Z? Then you should ask them the question like, why not do it? Like
Yeah.
what's the what's the alternative? You know, or what's the downside? I failed, or well, at least I can say I tried. At least you didn't, right? So, you know,
And if anything, like I'm also looking at what you just said, Chris, is like that could be feedback for them, or maybe for all of us,
it
right?
could
When
be.
when that
Yeah.
conversation happens, it's like going back to Scott's point earlier. Someone telling me that may help me realize that I wasn't even aware of this. I didn't even know I do this in public. I didn't even know I interact with, servers this way. It might have been something that I was conditioned to from whatever age. And then someone coming to me and saying, hey, you know what, I realized, because the other caveat to it is I do think that there is not a right way, but I think there is a proper way to give the feedback. That's not accusatory, but more so, hey, this is what I've observed. What are your thoughts? Or what did you see? Or why did you choose this action? That kind of opens up a space for me to process and reflect. And if anything, that I'll also just brief caveat to, or brief tag on, is like, in my opinion, I don't think people get enough honest feedback throughout their lives.
Absolutely not. People are afraid to hurt people's feelings, Oleg. Period.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's not necessarily what you say, is how you say it too.
Yes.
Some people are just brash, and you have to determine for yourself if you want. I think brutally honest people, if they're honest and their intentions are pure, honest feedback can be great, because you can have somebody listen. The greatest threat comes from the inside. So it's like, if you think a person, you may be asking a person to give you honest feedback that may be jealous of you, right? And then their feedback isn't from a place of good intention. It's a place it's to see you falter, or to see you,
how to pull you down with them,
try to pull you down, because of maybe Oleg and Scott, has gotten here, and the person around them. It's like, every time I ask you a question, you never give me positive feedback for some reason. Like, what's going on here? Like, you can start see. I always say this: people always show their hand. You realize it over time, but people always show their hand, even when they're trying to keep it concealed. You can tell over time, like, okay, this person is not really giving me the feedback that I actually want, because they may be jealous, and people act in a certain way to kind of reveal themselves, even when they think that they're not.
It's so true. And there's so much that you all are saying that have tied into experiences that I had. And I really want to thank you both for sharing this and raising these topics so candidly. During the pandemic, several of the closest, and Chris, you touched on this earlier, the closest friendship relationships that I'd had in my life died. And looking back on them, there were reasons that I understood. But one of them, and this was at that time probably the longest term friendship I'd had with anyone outside of maybe one or two people from high school. I look back and there had been signs of the person beginning to show their hands that I had ignored. For instance, this person had said about a salary that I had made at a certain organization, Scott, I mean, you really were kind of overpaid for what you were doing. And looking back on that, right?
Exactly.
Like, and that was given as constructive feedback.
How's that constructive?
Right.
That's not. You were overpaid.
Yeah.
Wait, so I didn't earn what I was earning?
Exactly.
Like, think about that for a second.
I think I should have been making more, honestly.
But seriously, people always show their hands, Scott. Always.
Yeah, and that's why that's really helpful, because one of the things that can be easy to do, and I've fallen into this trap, is giving people the benefit of the doubt, and drawing the line between giving people the benefit of the doubt. And like we mentioned earlier, sometimes a person is not their best self on that day, and so you want to give them a chance to recover from mistakes that they made, but then also looking and saying, well, is this remark or is this behavior a signpost of who and what they really are? Interestingly enough, right before this show, literally moments before I signed on, I had this conversation with my husband, because we're talking about Kevin Spacey, who's in the news yet again due to allegations of sexual abuse against people in England. And, we're saying, my initial reaction without knowing all the details of the story was like, come on, dude, like, why don't you listen?
Yeah,
Get it under control. But then we started to have a deeper conversation. Well, Kevin Spacey became very famous, and he was surrounded by people that were giving him accolades all the time, and that the residual impact of that may still be within him. He may have had other issues, anything from a personality disorder to alcoholism. I'm not saying he did, but he could conceivably have had any of these issues, and we don't know who he was surrounding himself with. And so that was funny, because one of the things I stated this to David, and I've stated this throughout my relationship with him, and I certainly do this with him as well. Going back to your statement about honesty and having real conversations, Chris, to me, if he were to not say things like, Scott, you need to stop doing XYZ now, or Scott, you're going to get in trouble, or Scott, you need to be careful, or Scott, you're walking down a road that's going to destroy you. To me, him doing that, having the courage and feeling the safety to do that, is this ultimate sign of love. But you can tell if the person really is trying to help you from, I guess, to me, what I'm hearing is, it's one thing to say, stop, this behavior is self-destructive, and I care about you, in a way that is supporting you as a human being, as opposed to stop doing it because I don't like it, or stop doing it because, you're making more money than me and I'm ticked off about that, or any of these sorts of things. Love to me is to sometimes pulling people back.
And those same people are going to be with you when you're at your lowest. So you never know who's with you when you're at your highest, because it's easy to be around you.
True.
Scott and Oleg is the man, and everybody is trying to take a picture with you, and everybody's just around you giving you all these accolades. Is when you're at your lowest is when you realize who's with you for sure, right? Because you got to go through things top and to bottom to realize who's good. That's why you said Oleg earlier. It's like, that's why, from a relationship standpoint, I think people, when they have few friends, especially if they're older, they've experienced life at a point where they've probably been the person who was at the top, and then they actually been the person who was at the bottom. And the people who they're with at that point in their lives are the people who was with them, and who were not afraid to tell them what they needed to hear. And at the time when they needed to hear it, probably brushed it off. But then they were at their lowest. Guess who those same people, or that person, was around them when they needed them the most. And then it kind of opens up your eyes too, right? When you So it's like you said, Scott, was with Kevin Spacey. There's no telling who was around him and who, because that life can be a huge illusion until something happens, or you start getting away with a lot of things until somebody says something, then you realize that, this, and the next thing you know, the person that you want to call is, hey, their phone number has changed all of a sudden. You can't read, they can't, they don't return your texts or your emails, and it's like, oh God, this is real.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of things that can happen for sure.
And look, also within that, what I'm realizing is that those, at least my experience has taught me, is that those friendships are rare, as far as the people who are there for you at your lowest and highest. And it's actually made me think of, I was thinking of the whole Will Smith situation that took however many weeks ago. I haven't seen him since. Like, I haven't seen a single film. I haven't seen anything that he's been featured in. And so it makes me realize that when you get to that point, how is he processing? Now, once again, I'm not condoning any of his actions or anything, but it's just also like, that's probably one of the low points of his career, at least to this point. And so it just makes me, it's for me, it's interesting. And I'm also curious how the two of you do this. And that's, how do you preserve those relationships for the people who are there for you, regardless of the circumstances? Like, what are your daily actions? How do you make sure that you're still in their lives, regardless of what the situation is?
I was thinking about this a week or so ago. I think people need to understand what unconditional really means, or what being somebody's rock really means. A lot you hear that saying a lot. You know, I'm ride or die, or I'm a loyal friend, and you hear it a lot,
Yeah.
right? But then you can only test that notion when your friend or whoever is at a low point where they may not be their best selves at all, right? So then, like, if, for example, if you're in a romantic relationship, unconditional love, you have to really thoroughly understand what that means. That's a lot, right? Because again, it's easy to love someone when everything is fine,
Mm-hmm.
right? Unconditional love is you love them when they're at their worst. As a friend, same thing. When your friend is at their worst, maybe they've been on drugs and they're just low. You gonna leave them when they're at their lowest? Like, try to get them help, even it's going to continue to hurt, especially depending on what they're doing. It's going to continue to hurt. But then, if they can get back on that path, then that's what it is. But also, too, to answer your question, Oleg, is to preserve the relationship. I think now, I'm not saying this is easy, but the concept is simple. If you want to be a good friend, be a good friend, right? So, just think about how you want a friend to treat you, and just do that. Pick up the phone, text, check in once in a while. Just be a good person. And that's going to even if that person doesn't reciprocate that to you, you just put that karma out there for it to happen. Especially if it comes from a place of being genuine.
Are you proud of the friend you are to your friends? Either of you?
I can do better for sure, if I'm being honest. I can reach out more. I can check in more, because you see people every day dying on TV. You see what I'm saying? Like what happened in Buffalo, what happened in Texas, right? Happened in California. And these people are just going to church, school, and worship. I mean, grocery shopping. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, man, like, am I that busy throughout the day? Just send a simple text, regardless if it's responded to or not. Thinking of you, man, just checking in on you. I hope everything is okay. But I can be better. I can be a better at everything, if I'm being honest.
I have to respond in exactly the same way. I'm thinking there are a lot of ways in which I am an inadequate friend. I could do better. It's really
what stands in the way? Why?
I think that sometimes I just might not be thinking about it. Distraction. I'm laziness. And things that are strengths are so often flaws too. For instance, Chris mentioned earlier my work ethic.
Very true.
So I have that work ethic. I will have the drive and put in that drive to succeed at whatever I'm doing. And I will get very focused on that. But so that's good. I achieve and I do things and I help people or make an impact and all that. But then that means I'm focused on that and not necessarily being a good friend. Sometimes I try, and fortunately I have this sort of relationship with my husband where he has no hesitation being honest with me, letting me know when I need to do better. But, I still worry sometimes, do I make sure that he feels loved? There are times earlier in my relationship with him, as the relationship was developing, where I look back in horror at things that I said or the way I said them or neglect that I gave to the relationship or things that I could have done better or things that I put him through. And I'm just like, oh my God, I could have been so much better. And in fact, some of them, part of why I'm very expressive with him about how I feel about him and appreciation now is there was a period of time when I really did have to take stock of, had I been as good of a partner to him as he deserved? No, I hadn't. And if that had gone on, well, I could have lost him. But more importantly, if that had gone on, he could have been in a relationship with someone who didn't, without fully appreciating how much of a jewel and a light he's been in my life. And so I vowed personally to change, but I always feel like I could be doing better.
Yeah.
Scott, for you to look in the mirror and ask yourself that's tough to do. Because self-reflection is the hardest. I think getting to know people is easy to do. Getting to know yourself is extremely hard.
And accepting those things, yeah.
And 100% and accepting it, because the last thing you want to do is look in the mirror and say you're the one that's messed up. Like it's you. Like, so a lot of people can't look in the mirror and tell them it's themselves. You're the reason why you're in certain situations, or your spouse feels this way, or your brother or your sister don't like you. It's you. That's hard to do.
Well, and in my case, I think that, and I say this not just to talk about me, even though that's fun, but really because I know I'm not the only person in the world in this situation. There can be a sense of shame that you feel if someone else is pointing at you and saying you, like you said, Chris. It's always possible to rationalize it, particularly because, as has been pointed out, we never really know 100% of what's going on in someone else's mind. Now, briefly answering a question that Oleg raised earlier, to me, part of when you know that you know someone, and with my husband, it's how I know, is that there's an extreme predictability. I can almost imagine what he's saying before he's saying it. And sometimes I can't imagine the exact words. Or I'll say in my mind, I bet you're thinking X, Y, Z. And he'll say, yes, actually I was. And he'll do this. Right. So that sort of, it's not premonition, but it's sort of like premonition. It makes me think I really, really do know the person. Or it's so predictable. But that being said, even if someone loves you and points at me, there's always a possibility that there's a motivation that I don't understand. Whereas if you're pointing at yourself and looking in the mirror and saying, this that you did was pretty fucked up, or it really made you look bad, or it's embarrassing, or this, that, and the other, I feel shame about it sometimes. Working through and dealing with a sense of shame that can come with that, so that it's perhaps a managed emotion rather than an out of control generalized sense about my identity, has been a skill that I've worked very, very hard to develop. And that comes with what you talked about earlier, Chris, developing a sense of self-confidence. But you cannot run away. If you shame or disgust or dismay or any of these feelings, you can't write it off as a lie if you are accusing yourself and you know it's true.
For sure.
You know what? One thing that both of you brought this up, and you as well, what you just said, Scott, something that I actually had a one time in figuring it out how to make it work, and I didn't see it at the beginning, was when I was first starting Overcoming Odds. I mean, I had put so much time and energy into it, and what I realized as part of that process, which is I think very similar amongst the three of us, is having that work ethic and the drive. I lost intimate relationships. I put a lot of my friends on the call you later list. I put all these desires and things that I wanted to do on the, to do later or to do tomorrow, only to realize that tomorrow became tomorrow, and then it became never. And I realized how grateful I am to have the ability to self-assess and to realize that, being driven, being goal-oriented, it's great because it gets things done. But at the same time, it could be a huge thing, something that is completely detrimental to relationships, to friendships. Because I remember years focusing or literally, like, I was obsessed. I was obsessed with creating this community for other people, and yet I completely abandoned the community that was in front of me.
Yeah, for sure. I think you have to look at whatever you're trying to achieve, what is actually going to cost.
Correct.
Not in the monetary sense, and I think that's a part of the American culture. It's always, think about it.
And there's always a cost associated with everything, every action.
100%. I think, and you have to. I'm gonna say this briefly because I have a hard stop in 2 minutes, but it's one of those things to where you have to look at what's it going to cost and is it worth the cost? Because what good is it achieving this goal that you want to achieve, and then when you look around, you're the only one standing there, and it's like, oh man, this is not even this nowhere near what I wanted to happen, but then you did it. But then also too, it's a culture. Think about the time you've been on vacation and you're thinking about work, or you're thinking about you getting behind, or somebody's going to take your spot. When it's just like, just relax. Life is short. Work hard and have some fun, man. Seriously.
Chris, what you've talked about goes us to the heart of your show, Success Fundamentals. With the show coming to a close, talk to us very briefly just for a few seconds about where people can find you and what Success Fundamentals is all about?
Absolutely. Success Fundamentals is where Brian and I break down all the nuances of success. We look at it through a different lens and help you determine what the success is in your own life, as opposed to maybe the preconceived notion that you think it is. We're on all podcast platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
I love it. Oleg, where can people find out more about you and tell us a little bit about you?
For me, it's through Overcoming Odds. And in simple terms, what that platform's about is helping people create a narrative they like and believe in. So whether it's changing the narrative around their current circumstances, their fears, whatever the obstacles they have, you and I are going to be part of an event, Mr. Mason, in October.
Yes.
Called Survive to Thrive, Face Your Fears. And it's going to be a 3-day event in Austin, Texas, all based around helping people identify those fears, turn them into strengths, or turn them into ways to use those fears, use it as fuel. So, but I know that we're not the only two that have shows or ways to find us. So there's got to be a way that they could also find you.
Exactly. Find out more about me on purposehighway.com. My podcast explores changes in the belief systems that are guiding people through ethics, purpose, and a sense of spirituality that are emerging as the traditional paradigms that have guided us in those spaces disappear and new forms of thinking emerge. We have a lot of amazing episodes coming up, and I want people to learn and have their mind blown. Now let's talk a little bit about our sponsor. Our sponsor, Spectrum Designs, is a t-shirt and apparel printing and embroidery company that almost exclusively employs people on the autistic spectrum, which is a population that has a near 90% unemployment rate. They give folks on the spectrum real jobs with real careers, and they'll make you look good while you're at it. Oleg, tell the people more about Spectrum.